Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And today we're going to delve into my favorite topic of all times, which is astrology. I love astrology more than any other subject. I find it to be instantly validating and constantly curious in every way, shape, and form. When I see the aspects happening and I see the events roll out on the world stage, I find it to be absolutely fascinating. Got a great guest coming on in a few seconds. I want to make a quick announcement about my newsletter, which comes out every Sunday afternoon at 1:30. And in there, I do a brief overview, mundane overview of where the planets are in the world for that week. And then I break it out into the individual signs. And I always encourage you to read your sun sign and your rising sign. If you don't know your rising sign, you can go to my website. I have a rising sign calculator there. You can enter your birth date, place, and time, and you will get your rising sign. Always read those two together, put them together into a little astrology sandwich, and you'll have your reading for the week to come. And you'll be very happy about that. I'm sure you'll see how accurate it is. If one doesn't work, the other one will, and you'll be amazed at what you see. Always remember, though, that I'm talking about themes. I'm not going to tell you to buy a lottery ticket on Wednesday, but I will say perhaps money might be in your life this week. So it's about the themes. Overarching themes are what makes astrology work. So without any further ado, my guest today is Virginia Bell. She's a fabulous astrologer. She's been a full-time astrologer since the 1990s and currently writes a horoscope column and celebrity profiles for the CBS magazine Watch. She's a regular contributor to the Huffington Post and has written astrology columns for magazines including TV Guide and US Weekly. So she's a fascinating astrologer. She has just published, or is about to publish, a book coming out this coming week called Midlife is Not a Crisis. Now that has been news to me because I've had crises all my life, but I've learned to live with them, and I think it's fine. Welcome to the show. Virginia Bell is her name, and it's so great to have you on the show today, Virginia. My great honor to have you on today.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I've always been fascinated with the concept of midlife and astrology because I see how the two line up. Because, as we both know, astrology is a measurement of time and cycles and the interplay of the two. And when we see ourselves walking through different stages of life, we know how these significant events occur at certain times within a range of period. And I'm curious as to why you sort of chose this topic. Is it because you yourself are entering into it, or just that the fascination of the topic itself?
Well, I've been through pretty much every cycle except 84, because the Uranus return, because I'll be 74 next month in May. But over the years, as I've been studying astrology and getting to know the generational cycles, I've just got fascinated with these different initiations or passages that we all share at the same age, like the Saturn return at 29, midlife, the Chiron return, the second Saturn return. And of course, the midlife is probably the biggest and most important in a sense. Mm-hmm. And and it's, again, not a crisis, but it is a journey.
It's a journey. It's a time, I think, to take stock and sort of reevaluate where you're going. We sort of come to terms with our mortality, I think, at some point there, because we've already got a lot of mileage on the old car, as they say.
Yeah, I believe so. The Saturn return, in a way, at 29, we get Saturn, we get Sirius, we create a foundation. If we're doing it right, we take on some challenge and we work hard to manifest that, and we grow in the process. Mm-hmm. And we do our Saturn years in our 30s. But then, as you know, late 30s and then, of course, early 40s, we hit the midlife. Right. And an old life is over and a new one is about to begin.
Mm-hmm. And that's when and I think there was Carl Jung who first coined the phrase midlife crisis, I believe. And I think he based his observations on the Uranus opposition, which would be at 42.
Yeah, that is the peak,
Mm-hmm.
but the midlife is complex. Unlike Saturn, which is no walk in the park, it involves four planets, Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, and Saturn, and it's spread over almost a decade. Of course, not to scare your listeners, it's not all a crisis all during that time, but it is a time that is so powerful because whatever we put on the back burner during our 30s as we were building our life and doing our Saturn begins to call us, sometimes quite loudly.
Mm-hmm. And
You know,
I think the word crisis in some ways may be misappropriated because it really doesn't mean it's a call to action. I think is a better way of phrasing it. Although I understand why you use the word crisis, it certainly has it's the right connotation. But I think it's really a call to action to take stock of where we are, evaluate how we're going to best go forward, and we oftentimes people find themselves unhappy at that stage and do make a turn. This is why it's called the midlife crisis. The guy goes out and buys the red sports car and leaves his wife, and
right.
these are sort of the stereotypes that we hear regarding the midlife crisis.
Right. Well, yeah, and the old Chinese saying, that word crisis in Chinese is made of two characters. One is danger and one is opportunity.
Ah, I like that.
So it's an opportunity to move forward. So whatever, as I said, whatever we put on the back burner, whether it is, the person who's been a workaholic, like Ted Turner, he left his business and actually, went around the world on his sailboat. It was called something like Freedom, or which was kind of perfect, Or we see so many women who get pregnant at 40,
Yeah.
because this is the time that whatever we haven't done, we need to really listen to that.
Right.
But I see it as in stages because Pluto for our generation has really come before. In Pluto, there are these three different, like all stories, three different stages, and the Pluto square Pluto that comes in our late 30s, that's a time to really look at whatever we have not faced in our life,
Mm-hmm.
the deep work. It's sort of the past masquerading as the present. Somebody loses their job or they have a crisis in their life. It's usually comes from a deeper, earlier time. Maybe it has to do with a parental issue. So it's time to do that deep work, the shadow work.
Yeah.
We can't change something we're not aware of. Pluto makes us aware. Thank you very much, Pluto.
Thank you very much, Pluto. And oftentimes, not to counter your talk a little bit earlier about the idea of not being afraid, these are opportunities to rise to the occasion. Oftentimes, the call of Pluto is to sort of, I think, fulfill your manifest destiny in some way. And if you haven't addressed that manifested destiny, the time has come to sort of step into that. And that means that can be a time of great opportunity, as you mentioned earlier. And it's the people who rise to the occasion and jump into those challenges when they're aware who really come out ahead. And nothing worth having ever comes easily. So hard work is always involved, and life is difficult. There's no question about it. And it's how we are flexible and able to adapt to it that best prepares us for the future and our potential, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Carl Jung, and he said life really does begin at 40. Up until then, you're just doing research, so to speak. But if we get the Pluto right, if we do the deep work, then when we have the Uranus opposition a few years later, we're not, we're really going after genuine desires and not repeating an old pattern. So the first stage in midlife is to do that deep work, to face what we haven't faced. And for everyone's different. Sometimes it's not a major crisis. If we're living in integrity, it's not going to be dramatic. Or, I have in the book Robert Downey Jr., who was, had a great Saturn return. He was at the top of his career, but he was also, addicted.
Mm-hmm.
And he tried again and again to go into rehab, and it didn't work. Finally, at his Pluto square Pluto, he went into rehab, and this time it stuck. He was able to face those demons. And so all of us are not going to have that kind of, midlife, but there are things that we do put on the back burner and that we haven't faced, and it's our time. Then when we have the Uranus opposition, it's not so much changing who we are, it's becoming who we are. As they used to say in Est, I did a lot of workshops in my earlier days, Est, they used to say it's not, not changing who you are. It's really, I used to be different, now I'm the same.
Oh, okay.
You see, after you did the workshop, I used to be different, now I'm the same. So when the Uranus is that planet of freedom, individuation, it's that planet that, as you know, was discovered in 1741 between the American and French Revolution. So it's about rebellion, it's about challenging the status quo. So if we're doing it right at that Uranus point in our early 40s, we go out on a limb for something we really want. We stay out there longer than most sane people wouldn't, and we hang out there. That's when the magic kicks in.
It does, and I think it has to have the motivation of there has to be a sense of urgency there, which I think comes with the Uranus quality in itself. It has that certain electrical kind of charge to it that forces us to be more responsive, and I think it's important that happens at that time. I know that in my case, my wife wanted to have a third child, and I had already had twins at that point. I was afraid of having twins again.
Oh my God.
But I decided to do it, and we had our third child when I was 39, and actually it was I was 40. And so I understand that was a thing that I think had to be done. Very grateful, very happy I did. It changed our lives in a very dramatic and powerful way. But that's the sort of thing. It's more about the idea of a transition happening, I think, and people often misrepresent the idea of transition as being, the sky is falling. When I see transition as a perfect example for me for transition, I use this all the time with my clients, is think of a woman being pregnant. At the end of the pregnancy, that is a transition, but that transition delivers a baby. So it's a wonderful opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you look at anybody's life, famous people or, just friends, something shifts at that Uranus opposition. Look at Jung. Jung broke with Freud.
Yeah.
And was persona non grata in Switzerland. Even though he himself had quite a career, he was abandoned by the psychoanalytical community, and he went into a depression. He cut back on his clients, and every day after lunch, he would go in his garden and play with his toy soldiers. I love that about, to get back to that heart center. What was he feeling? What does he want? And then he said afterwards, it was the prima materia of my life's work. Everything came after that. The whole thing about the shadow and individuation, all of his great discoveries came after that.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense, too, because I think what he was doing, he was going back and sort of revisiting his past and sort of making amends with it. And until he did that, he couldn't really move forward.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And being Aquarius rising, he needed, he was not a follower.
Right. No. And he was he was, I think one of the reasons he had this split with the community was the fact that he was actually exploring the idea of Eastern religions and Eastern philosophies and astrology at the same time, and they didn't consider it to be credible, so he lost some of his cachet as a result. But but now we look back at him, we see what a pivotal figure he was to the New Age world and to all the things that you and I both work on. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember reading, he had some letters from back and forth from Freud, and he was always trying to encourage him to, explore the Ouija board and astrology and all these things, and Freud wasn't having it, but it just shows that what a expansive consciousness that Jung had at that time.
I really hope he opened up so many doors, I think, for so many people as a result, but, look at the hard work he had to go through. So that's a very good example of hard work, but the hard work, it's the same way I approach Saturn. People think of Saturn as being a nuisance, but I think of it as being your greatest asset, because Saturn is the one that gets you to move. If you didn't have Saturn there pushing you, you wouldn't be the responsible person you are. And that hardship is what gets things done.
I agree totally. Saturn, to me, is not all hard work and responsibility, and Jupiter's not all lotto and good luck.
Of course,
Jupiter could be overextension, overexpansion, and without Saturn, we can't do anything. We need that self-discipline. So Saturn, it can be a friend. And I
I
think
think
what's
Saturn
in
is
the
a friend. Yeah.
second Saturn return, I think we have an opportunity to embody Saturn, you see,
I
you know.
agree too. Yeah, I think the second Saturn return dovetails nicely with our conversation because it really does bring us. I think the first Saturn return is a time when we sort of do all the putting our pants on, so big boy pants, so to speak, and
Yeah,
we get the house, we get the marriage, we get the baby, we get the mortgage, we get all that stuff done. Second Saturn return, a lot of those things that we took on then are sort of out of the way, and now it's time to focus on ourselves more so and sort of turn that inward and say, what are you really supposed to be doing here on this planet? Now, we put things on hold necessarily because we have to. We've got
yes.
responsibilities, we've got bills to pay. But then when the second return comes, I think it's time for us to sort of say, okay, what should I be doing now? And this is key.
I think that is true, and I know Stephen Forrest has said, what is the great task worthy for the rest of your life? Because in our first Saturn return, we do have, it's more about what we want to get. We're carving out identity. We're pushy, we're arrogant, we're young. But the second Saturn return, and again, this comes from Stephen, is more about what we want to give.
Mm-hmm. Well,
What
how can we give back? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a beautiful thing, the second Saturn return. I always say we're a rookie elder, we're a beginner at 58, but we enter this great passage, this great initiation into being an elder and not an older. And I'm sure you get that. It's not about being an older because, again, I go back to Stephen has said, anybody become hit 58 or 60, that doesn't make you an elder. That's an archetype. Another archetype is the old fool, so to speak. So to become an elder, not everybody becomes an elder. And I think the second Saturn return is a wonderful, wonderful time of deepening too, and that task that we need a task, just like we had a task in the earlier years, we need another task, but it's comes more from an inner desire than an outer one. And we need to find more meaning, something aligned to who we are now in our late 50s.
And that's clearly evident in the chart of the individual. You can see that even if they haven't reached that point in their life to that point, they will ultimately get there. I think that I always use the analogy of a cuckoo clock and that we're all filled with these little wheels and gears that are going at different revolutions and stuff. And then every once in a while they click into place. And when they click into place, the cuckoo arrives and comes out. And that's when you arrive. And I think people arrive at different points in time. These points that we're talking about are definitely prods to get us to move in those points. But we do all arrive at different times. And I think that's just part of our destiny. But we do have to, we can see that. It's clearly delineated in the potential of the astrology chart, whether people rise to that or not. I think it's also about being self-aware, what your limitations are, where your interests are, and how you really say, okay, I'm only here for a short time. How am I going to maximize my time on the planet here?
Yeah, I agree totally. And what you said before about timing, to me, one of the most important, maybe the important things that I've learned from astrology is that we all have our own individual timing. And we have to honor that. We have to honor that process. As they say in AA, it takes as long as it takes. And I see so many people that, my life is over and I'm not going to make it, in their 20s, 30s, 40s. And I was like that too. I am definitely not only a late bloomer, I'm a slow learner. And I always say, even crawling gets you there. I'm 74, my book is coming out. I mean, I had another book early on, but this is more connected to who I am. For me, it's all come together later in life. And I love to be able to share that with people because, we have that each in ourselves. Like you say, we have our own timing. And it's hard not to beat yourself up, whether you have a lot of Virgo or not. People do. We all beat ourselves up. I think we're all hard on ourselves. But that, it's like flowers. A rose is no less than a daffodil because it blooms later in the season. Mm-hmm. So trusting our timing is I think is important.
And I think that people, if they were to look back at their lives in retrospectively, they would see that they did things at the right time. I think that's the other thing. You can always have regrets, I think, but you can always wake up the next day and say, okay, I'm starting something new and work with that. If you work with the astrology and you are in sync with the timing, I think you'll find that the results do occur and they do arrive when they should.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, a great value of astrology. You know, somebody is at a crossroads and nothing's happening, and then you do their chart and you see, well, maybe the moon, progressed moon is going through the 12th, or they're having this Saturn issue or big Neptune, you know, and so, but knowing that this is what's happening now and how to work with it,
Hmm.
and that there will be, you know, there are other aspects ahead. There are other new beginnings. You're not at the end of something. I like to say that, you know, a beginning always starts with an ending. And sometimes we do have to end, you know, something in order to begin something new.
And that gets back to the whole idea of transition. Ending is not necessarily bad. If you have a bad relationship, you're happy when it ends. If your job is not good, you're happy
That's
when you leave it. So you can't think of endings as all necessarily bad. I think there's a preconceived notion that, it has a certain finality to it and it's not as dire as that.
And also failure.
Hmm.
As failure, I have found in my life, there's a quote I read many years ago, and I don't know who said it, but how far high failure overleaps the bounds of low success. And I have found that in my life, things I thought were failures actually opened the way to other
I
things.
know, it's so true. I've had so many major setbacks in my life, and I found that they were really the cornerstones of the foundation that I was able to build upon that got me to where I am. So I totally
Yeah.
get that. That makes perfect sense to me.
Oh, good.
It's
Yeah.
it's fascinating. One of the things about the midlife that I have always thought, and I'm curious as your take on it, is the idea of us sort of growing into our ascendant. And the reason I use that, it's a term, is because I think of the ascendant as the skin or the mask that we wear to the outwardly to the world. And as we wear that uniform or skin, metaphorically speaking, we become more comfortable in it. So as you age, you become more comfortable in the realm of what you are projecting, and therefore you gain a certain confidence or at least a certain surety about yourself because you've experienced more experiences, you've lived through more, you have more of a wellspring. And I'm wondering how you feel about the role of the ascendant in the chart.
Well, I love that concept. I've never heard the ascendant used quite in that way of, you know, growing into it, but it makes perfect sense because it's what you present to the world. And like the rest of the chart, if you are doing the work, you're growing, healing, evolving, then that ascendant too has more gravitas. It has more, it's, you know, what you see is what you get, so to
Right.
speak.
And I think the analogy of being comfortable in your own skin applies to that too, because I think that as we age, we become more comfortable. You're not often comfortable in your skin when you're 17 or 18. If anything, you're just the opposite. You're very uncomfortable in those years. But as you get older and accomplish more, that skin feels more comfortable or feels more like you. You feel comfortable in your own skin. That's the only way to
Yeah.
say it.
I think it's a great metaphor, and I know that's true for me. I was never happy-go-lucky person with the sun and the moon, the eighth house.
Right.
And as I've gotten older, I've actually become more happy, more content. I was never happy. The whole concept wasn't even on my radar.
Hmm.
But as I've gotten older, more mileage on the meter, so to speak, hopefully we have more wisdom, we have more experience. You know, the hormones go to, but so does the drama. So I am much, much more comfortable now in my 70s. Who I never would have thought that years ago. Even in my 50s were great, but 60s were really, that's when I started to get happy.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way. I mean, I think that a lot of if I look back over my life, a lot of the things that were triggering events to me happened on the 90-degree square of a Saturn. Not, the 7 years, the 14, the
Mhm.
21, the 28. All those years seem to be pretty pivotal to me. Seem to be pretty important to me because they were so pivotal, and um, they brought about that, as we were talking about earlier, that Saturn sort of demand for something to happen, whether they're triggering events or not. But they do color the character, and experience does create character. You've got to walk the mileage. You have to put the mileage in order to understand what you're going to be at the end. You have to wear those shoes, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I really do think, and I think for me, a lot of that has to do with the inner work.
Yeah.
And aging is, you know, being willing to grow, being willing to look at yourself and be willing to change. One of the best um, sayings I heard was from a spiritual teacher named Ramtha, and he was a spirit channel by J.Z. Knight, and I remember him saying, "You people want to know why you age because you cannot change." And I never forgot that. And again, not changing who we are, but just being open to new things, having a purpose, having a goal. I think that's so important in our elder years, or old at any time, but especially as we get older. We, as Maggie Cohen said, the activist who started Grey Panthers, we must have a goal. At every stage in life, we must have a goal.
Yes, I would agree completely. You have to have, everybody needs a purpose at some point in their life in order to move forward. And I think that idea of having the purpose and having the goals there before us hold great wisdom. And it's not until we really experience those things that we arrive. I think that's really has to happen almost. It's I don't think there's no easy way around it. You can't just arrive, which is why people who arrive under false pretense, say somebody who wins a lottery, often their lives don't go as they planned because they have this major distraction that they think everything is taken care of. But more often than not, people who win great amounts of money like that end up being very unhappy. I mean, they can't seem to acquire what they want because they're not truly focused on their true purpose.
I read years ago in the magazine section of the Times, they had an article about lottery winners, and about 85% say they wish it never happened.
Yeah.
And I think because they didn't have the structure, it didn't come from a book they wrote or a movie they directed or something they worked on, a research project. It came from outside and it wasn't connected to who they were. And so that makes sense,
Yeah, and it's sort of a random roll of the dice that happened to be, I guess people would obviously think of it as being good fortune, but it casts their light in such, it removes the motivation, removes all of what it means to be alive. That whole struggle of the Sisyphusian, rolling the rock up the hill and having it roll back down on you is just part of it. We have to experience that. I think that's a very necessary part of what it means to be a human being. And we can't get there otherwise. So when people, as astrologers, people come to us when they are usually unhappy. They're not coming to us when everything is hunky-dory. So when they come to us and they want to know why things are they are, when they're going to change, we have the ability to say, I do at least, that this is part of life. Life is difficult, and reward comes through hardship sometimes. And I don't want that to sound as if it's a foregone conclusion that you have to have hardship in order to be successful. You don't. But it is a motivator that does get people to up and move. There's no question about it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people come who have, when people have it too easy, there's no friction, there's no growth, there's no motivation to change.
Right. Yeah, that is the key. It's the motivation to change. So those hardships are necessary. We all are going to have them. I think we have them at different times, and that is significance. And it is a turning point in our times. And it's something to be cherished and relished rather than, discarded. We're talking today with Virginia Bell. She's the author of a great new book called Midlife is Not a Crisis, Using Astrology to Thrive in the Second Half of Your Life. It's going to be coming out within the next week, so I encourage you to do that. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a few minutes. In the meantime, check out her website. It's Virginia Bell Astrology, one long string of words, virginiabellastrology.com. You can check out her website. It's a beautiful website. She's a wonderful woman, very knowledgeable, has a very nice presence and a nice, beautiful website. I love your website. It's very appealing. Okay. So I encourage you folks to go there, and we'll be back and pick up where we left off. Okay, hang in there.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color.
Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher, and we have a great guest today. Her name is Virginia Bell. VirginiaBellAstrologer.com is her website, and her new book is just out, or will be out this week. It's called Midlife is Not a Crisis, contrary to popular opinion, using astrology to thrive in the second half of life. And it's marvelous topics, one I've always been interested in, and it's great to have you on the show, Virginia. And I'm curious, you must also work with progressions in this regard too, the progressed sun and the progressed moon, to see where people are going to be. That's obviously a big piece of it. But when you look at this sort of generationally, because we have this huge body of people, the baby boomers, 1946 to 1964, moving through this whole realm together, and their impact is huge, largely because of the aspects under which they were born are now coming into a period of fruition where we're all going to be hitting that spot, the largest generation in American history. How does this all play into that realm, do you think?
Well, it's interesting because, the mid-60s, actually, we're having the Chiron return of the mid-60s, that period in the mid-60s. Mm-hmm. But I think that, the baby boomers really are making a difference in how we age, because these are kids like yourself who grew up with holistic medicine and awareness of organic food, and also grew up somewhat with the internet, So I think, this group of people is a huge amount. How we age, these are some people who want to live forever. They take care of themselves. They're aware, they're conscious, they've done workshops, they've done therapy. And I think the whole concept of aging is changing.
I do too. And one of the things I'm encouraged by is because I grew up in that period, and when I was younger, I lived in a commune for a while, and I always thought that the communal living was very logical because it provided so many things. It provides shared resources, it provides community, it provides a lot of these basic things that we all need to in order to survive, rather than being isolated in our little houses. I love the idea of this generation reviving that idea, but into retirement communities where we have not necessarily nursing homes. I'm not talking about nursing homes. I'm talking about retirement communities where people of the same age get together and share resources like a tribe. I think the idea of a tribe is the one antidote to whatever seems to be pulling us apart everywhere else. I think the tribe, when you have that unity and community together, you are much more emboldened and much more likely to survive, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. And I have heard of communities that have gotten together or people gotten together and formed communities of artists or writers or retired professors and living together in the same, same area, the same community. And also there have been some, speaking of nursing homes, there have been, like in Denmark and I think in Amsterdam, where young people, they rent out in nursing homes some rooms to young people. So, and in exchange for volunteering with the residents, and that's been a wonderful success.
Yeah, I think that's so logical. You know, the Europeans are so much more together than we are here in the United States as far as all of the social programs. I mean, it's so, what could be more logical than to give an older person the life and love and creativity and joy of a younger person in their lives? I mean, it's just the most symbiotic relationship you can imagine. It's why I just became a grandfather about a month ago, and it's my first my first grandchild, and I can't wait to experience that. And because, you know, there's all of the joy and none of the headache.
Perfect. It's perfect.
I'm not changing diapers. I mean, I'll change diapers. I have no problem with that. But I'm saying I'm not going to have to worry about, running around and doing all the errands and the responsibility that parents have. I've already been there, done that. So I can sort of relax now. And I think that's a so logical connection to put those young people with, I think they should have nursing homes and nurseries together. Put the little kids with the old people and put them together and get them all figured out.
I agree totally, and I saw something like that on Facebook where they bring the little kids to, little babies and so forth, toddlers into the nursing home as well. And I think the whole idea of intergenerational living is very important. And again, Maggie Kuhn, who was, started the Grey Panthers, she believed strongly in that, and in the 70s, and she had a huge house where she had young people living there, and which supported her, helped her, and she was a mentor to them. And it's a wonderful thing to have that kind of situation.
Yeah, it's mutually beneficial to both parties because, and the young have such an innocence about them. They're not going to judge you because you're old. You're not going to get any of that. They have that certain wide-eyed wonder that they go through the world with, and it's innocence and it's grace, and it's a marvelous combination. And it's just fascinating. We're talking today with Virginia Bell about midlife is not a crisis, contrary to many people's idea. We have that nomenclature of midlife being a crisis, or we heard that term midlife crisis as sort of I guess you'd call it a cultural joke or some sort of thing that people latch onto. But really, midlife is an opportune time to take stock of where you are and decide on how to spend the rest of your life. Now, when you look at a chart, and you're looking for someone to help someone with this topic, where are the key points that you're looking for?
Well, first of all, I look to see are they in the middle of one of the generational cycles. A lot of people do come for reading at their Saturn return or before their Saturn return, 27, the lunar return or Saturn return, or mid or late 30s where they're moving into their midlife, or at 40, 41, 42, that's the peak. So people do come. So I look for that, of course, because I like to put a framework on, a reading. So that helps me put it in time. But then, of course, that's not the only thing happening in the chart, as we know.
Right.
The chart is dynamic. We have the generational cycles, but yet we have our personal aspects that are going on. And so, yes, but I do like to see if there is a generational cycle. And the midlife, of course, is dynamic. But second Saturn return, and the early 60s, very powerful as well.
Yeah, I think so, especially around that. And of course, again, getting back to that 7 cycle, I find that to be extremely powerful for me personally. I found that great progress and hardship have come at those 7s, and that's indicative of the Saturn role in our lives. And we were talking earlier about Saturn and Jupiter. People oftentimes Saturn can be your best friend and Jupiter can be your worst enemy.
Absolutely.
Because Jupiter will amplify, and if you're having a tough time, it can amplify all that is going wrong in your life at the same time. So we can't necessarily ascribe those those sort of textbook ideas to those two planets so easily. Oftentimes they can be reversed.
Yeah, no, I agree. And if we're willing to work with Saturn, I always think of these great gods, these planets as gods. I feel like then they think, thank you, let's do this together rather than fighting me. And Saturn, I don't think, Saturn is hard, but it's not bad.
Right.
And so I think if we're willing to work with the planets, then the planets will work with us. It's like you use the energy or the energy uses you.
Exactly.
And embracing that embracing Saturn. And I found myself, a couple years ago, or maybe it was last year too, I had Saturn opposite Saturn. I thought, oy vey, double vey here. I had, issues with bones. I had dental surgery, all of this. But you know what? It forced me to face certain things I'd been avoiding, putting off the dental surgery, putting off a lot of things. And it empowered me in the end because I was finally able to face these things, financial things, and it turned out to be a good time. And the deadline for this book, another Saturn situation. But I felt like finally I embodied Saturn, and also the whole aging thing. I tend to look young for my age, so I never really thought about it. But hitting 70 was like, whoa. Jesus, that's not, I think Gloria Steinem said, I woke up one day and there was a 70-year woman in my bed, and I thought, Jesus.
I know. It is.
Yes.
I know. I just went to Social Security myself, so I'm not far behind you. But it is, and it is a humbling experience. But I think, like you said, we are, as a generation, we are far more prepared to age than those of us that were younger. And I don't think of 65-ish being a time to hang up your hat and go off to pasture.
No, and I love, there's a woman who wrote a book called My Time, and she said there's a bonus decade. We have a new stage in life, a period of personal renaissance that is uncertain somewhere between middle age and old age. Yeah. So in a way, time has expanded for this generation.
Oh, it definitely has, yeah, I think so.
Boomers.
Yeah, I love that. I love that potential because it gives us more time. And I think that we, as a result of aging slower, we're able to really manifest that. And I think that we are able to rise to the occasion of what our chart presents for us much more effectively because we've had the experience. That is the thing. It's when you mentioned the squares and all that, I always see those as times of great potential. Yes, they can take you down, but if you lean into it, it's kind of like momentum. It's like there's a theory in physics, and I'm not going to get this right, but I know that if you're a baseball pitcher and you're throwing a ball at a batter, when that ball hits that bat, the potential of the ball coming towards the batter is doubled by the energy going back out again. So there's this ability to sort of hit that point just right and use that potential. Or the same idea is true in judo. When someone's coming towards you and you use their energy to back on them, you can manifest a wonderful outcome.
I love that metaphor. That is great. Yes, I think so. And Saturn helps us to focus. Yeah. We can't drift with Saturn. And so I've become more of a fan of Saturn in my later years,
I have too. And it's not to say that I hadn't had fights with Saturn. I have had, many difficult arguments with Saturn about why are you doing this to me now? And then after the dust settles and I realize, it's only in retrospect, which is one of the beauties of astrology and history itself, is the ability to look back. But when we look back, we can see that events that may have occurred and seemed difficult at the time were actually liberating in some ways and getting instrumental in getting us to where we needed to be.
Yes, very well said. Absolutely. And, those detours in life sometimes are necessary. We don't know who we're going to meet on a detour, or you lose a job, you're in the unemployment line, you meet your guru, or you're, sitting without a job in Starbucks, you pick up a magazine that changes your life. You just never know. Mm. And that's the beauty of life.
I love those moments when they happen because I've been in all iterations of those. I've lost jobs, I've gained jobs, I've met people, and all these things have happened, and they've turned out exactly. But if something interesting, if I were to look back at my life years ago before I knew astrology, I'm not sure I could have deducted all that. I think the astrology is really there. The map is there. The potential is there. And it's remarkable. I remember I have some clients, I'm curious as to how you feel about this, is that I've found that sometimes the fixed signs, I know one of which of you are, are a little bit more reluctant to make these changes than other signs. And I'm wondering how you feel about that. Do you think that there's a certain tenacity? I mean, fixed signs are wonderful. They get things done. They hold to their opinions. But is there a reluctance to change, do you think, there?
Well, I don't know. I'm a double Taurus. It takes the jaws of life for me to even change my brand of coffee, Chris. So
Okay, yeah.
I do think with the fixed signs, we have to be a little gentle with those people, because and not explain it, take baby steps. And then usually, and the chart is so dynamic. Like, I mean, I'm a double Taurus. You can't get more fixed than that. But I have 4 planets in Gemini.
Right.
So I can be very slow. And then all of a sudden, like happened when in my 20s, where I opened a restaurant with no experience, never worked in a restaurant except waitress a couple of times. I never went to culinary school. I thought, how hard could that be? I'll open a restaurant in New York City. Ended up doing it for 20 years. So I jump into things sometimes. But again, had I known astrology back then, I could see that I was having also not just my second Saturn return, but a progressed new moon and a lot of other things were happening. So sometimes it's the timing. So a fixed sign has to really kind of know that they're navigating towards a period when it may be a little bit easier for them to make a change.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I asked this question of Robert Hand, who I'm sure you know, one time. I said, can people change their charts? I said, people oftentimes come to me, and I have to say, probably it is the fixed sign person that comes to me and says, I don't like my chart. I'm not this kind of person. And even though the chart is clearly there and the way they are acting and manifesting is clearly in line with the chart.
Yeah.
And his comment back was, well, no, of course we can't change our charts. We can't change them. We're born with them. But what we can do is we can redirect them, which I love because that's simply a channeling of the energy in a different area.
I think that's beautiful. And it's sort of like reframing something.
Right. I mean, I'm always going to be impatient. I'm an Aries. I'm always going to have a certain craziness about me, impulsivity about me, and rushing to do things. And I'll buy a car without even thinking about it and then regret it later. But that's just me. But I was much more that way when I was younger, stuck in traffic. I'd be honking my horn and everything else, being a fiery Aries. But now as I've gotten older, I've learned to redirect that energy into things that are more better for me than honking my horn.
I agree. And I also, I think that, can people change? I think they can heal. And I've seen that. I think they really can heal and grow. And I know for me, as I've gotten older, that's been easier. And I'm less hard on myself.
Right.
That's the thing. I used to beat up myself so much. That was a full-time job in itself. Once you start doing that, it opens up a lot of time and energy. The inner critics.
How did you ever figure that one out? Because I'm still working on that one.
Well, because I was very successful at beating myself up, and I found out that no good comes of it. Absolutely none.
Well, I guess the way I've done it, and this is the Virgo in me, is that I allocate a period of time every day to worry, and then I put it aside.
I like that. Yes, absolutely. Okay, you have your time to do that, and then you can move on. I think that's a good way. See, Virgo, and I, again, my Virgo rising, and I've got a Neptune right there, too, on my ascendant. So that's a little sometimes difficult to work with. But Virgo, it's more about the job of Virgo to me is loving yourself for who you are, not for what you do. And it's a lifetime process.
I agree. Yeah.
But when I think about success now, I think that's probably one of my biggest successes. That and healing my eating disorder, healing my relationship with my father, and learning to love myself more than anything else. Yeah. And that I'm still working on.
That's a big step, though. I mean, because you can't love someone else till you love yourself, essentially. And I think that it's a lifelong process, and coming to terms with it is a really very exhilarating and liberating. I think it's just the greatest gift you could give to yourself is to finally say, hey, I'm okay, regardless of what I've done.
and sometimes, too, when I need to get a lot done and I'm procrastinating, and I just say, you know what, let it go. You'll do what you can. And that is rather than fight it, you know what I mean? Trying to just be gentle with myself.
Yeah, those are very valuable points. So when you look at at your book and your process, what would you say to someone who was approaching midlife? What would be your advice, and when would you say to be, sort of what would be your elevator speech with regard to midlife?
Well, I would say do the inner work. Mm-hmm. Do the inner work. Deal with any issues you haven't dealt with. That's the Pluto part. That's the Pluto piece. And, in the late 30s and early 40s, go out on a limb for something you want. I once heard Elizabeth Gilbert say on Oprah, ask yourself every day, what do I really, really, really want? 3 reallys. Keep asking that question. Keep moving in the direction of your dreams. And as they say in AA, it takes as long as it takes. But just keep, inching away there and finding out what you really want.
Mm.
And that takes that inner work.
It does
And
take some inner work, yeah.
the thing about the midlife is complex because Uranus is like living in Starbucks, mainlining, double espressos, and then Neptune is like you're lying on the couch with the remote, and you can't move. So you have to make room for everything.
Yeah, and it is true. And I think that people too often are concerned with getting a quick fix to whatever it may be. I think we live in a very we obviously live in a very fast-paced society, and the need for the instant gratification and the instant repair is part of our. I think that drives the impatience, and that gets people frustrated when they can't, realize that things happen slowly.
Right, and then Neptune piece. When Uranus, you got to go out on a limb, you got to go for something you want. But Neptune is 3 things: surrender, surrender, to surrender. So you've got both going on, and you need downtime with Neptune, soul time to go inward. So you have to carve out time for both of those things, and it's sort of like living. You have to be willing to live in the unknown for a while during midlife.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I think you have to.
It's not easy. It's not easy, and we live in a time where there's not a lot of support for downtime. There's not a lot of support for waiting, but sometimes one needs to. A delay can be very valuable.
Yeah, I agree, and we're not prepared for that at all. There's no one who really wants to take the time to be relaxed and stop. Well, that's part of our problem, I think, is this pace, which I think a lot of it is driven by the Uranus Pluto square, simply because and of course Uranus in Aries, what could be more revolutionary? It's that desire to hurry up and get things done, and of course the rate of progress and time itself is probably speeding up as we accelerate forward. But it certainly has lit a fire under that sense of urgency that we see now, whereby people used to wait a long time for things in the past. Now has to happen very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. But we also have Neptune in Pisces right now.
Of course.
So there you go. And I remember years ago in the 70s, Jean Houston, who's brilliant, teaching at the New School, and she said, walking down the street in New York in one day will have more information coming in to them than a person 100 years ago had their whole life. And that was in the 70s, before, the internet and iPhones. And she said, where does that go? Where does that go? And today we have so much coming at us that we need to let go of that. We need to delete it. And I think so important. And that's why I love Pico Iyer, who wrote that wonderful book, The Art of Stillness, I think, The Adventures of Going Nowhere. Mm-hmm. So we need that downtime. And it's interesting, now there are a lot of articles and blogs on stillness and solitude, and again, I love Pema Chodron, who says, make room for everything. And so you've got to make room for the stillness as well as the internet, so to speak. But you have to, I think it's important to carve down, in my opinion, carve out time, whether it's meditation or time in nature, to heal, to renew.
I know, and I think people's time that normally would be allocated for that is now being absorbed by things like Facebook and phones, and I think that's a shame. I think that people need to put them away. The Danish have this wonderful practice called hygge. I heard a podcast the other day. It was fabulous about it. It's I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but it's the Danish art of sort of relaxing. And what there's certain things you have to have. You got to have a fire. You got to have warm blankets. You got to have a cup of hot tea. You got to have friends and books around you. And you're not supposed to talk about contentious topics. You're supposed to sort of, forcibly relax. And I think it's a necessary antidote today more than ever because of the simple fact that we are in overdrive, and that's part of the problem. I think that the pace is way too quick.
Yeah, I agree. And I read an article in the New Yorker recently about that exact, I can't pronounce it, but exactly about that. I thought, what a wonderful thing. Now I'm a double Taurus, so I'm always, I always say my sun and moon are in the sign of warm scones and creme fraiche and jam.
You have no problem relaxing, I don't think.
What?
You have no problem relaxing.
No, I love a cuppa and a lie down.
I know. I have sons that are Tauruses, and were very slow to move, but that's okay. They are wonderful people, as are you. But I love the fact that the Tauruses always love the luxury. You know, they like the nice wool blankets and the good socks and
Yeah, there you go.
and the good china and the food and everything else, and it's wonderful. It's a great. And then it makes perfect sense that you own a restaurant. One of my sons, who's a Taurus, is a chef, by the way.
Oh, how interesting. I love it.
Yeah, he really loves food and loves the whole sort of tactile, sensual experience of being involved with all of his senses. And I love that. So
interesting. Well, I have my sun and moon in Taurus in the 8th house. So I call that learning to be cozy in the chaos.
Yeah.
Learning, as Ram Dass said once, learning to keep your heart open in hell.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and yet that's a wonderful piece of advice, because people often find that hard to do. It's when you find the opposite is always what you need. You know, it's like if you're in the middle of a crisis, you need to find the opposite to get you out of it. You know, it seems like there's always that dichotomy parallel in life. Just like in nature provides that. Near any kind of danger in nature, the solution is usually right next to it. Like if you go and find poison ivy, you're going to find the weed that's next to it. I think it's gypsum weed next to it that solves the problem of poison ivy. And this is sort of like part of the natural order of the universe here. So
yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, because I remember a therapist told me once, if you have more control when you're slowing down. Mm-hmm. You know, which is true. So, yeah, interesting.
You have to turn and face the storm rather than run from it. I think maybe that's what.
Right,
but again, that comes up to this. That's the square again, or the opposition. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why those hard aspects, the 8th house, the difficult placements. Although I've come to love the 8th house. It's harder when you're younger. I think. I'm sure you probably know that.
I think it's much harder when you're younger to have that. Yeah, it
can
be.
Pluto, a strong Scorpio. That's difficult when you're younger, and then you grow into it. But 8th house Scorpio, Pluto people, they're the shamans, the healers, the rescue workers. You don't learn that in graduate school or a weekend workshop. You learn it in Pluto school or 8th house school, right?
Yeah, you learn it walking the walk. There's no question about it. Yeah, that's so true. We've been talking about midlife is not a crisis, and I want you all to know that it's not a crisis. It is a wonderful time to give rebirth to yourself and to sort of take stock of where you are and where you're going. Nothing worth having comes easily, as the song says. And so therefore we have to sort of step into this period of time willingly, full eyes open, and understand our potential. And I think astrology is a wonderful way to do that. And it certainly provides the insight and the knowledge, and the timing is there of when to hold and when to fold, so to speak. And that's why it's such a valuable topic. I appreciate the fact that you've written this book so much, Virginia, because it really not only is it timely for a whole generation of people, but it also is, it opens the door in very simple and very easy to understand language for people to understand some of the complexities of astrology. I find that people really like astrology. They love it. They love that it's accurate, but they don't always want to do the work to understand it. They often come to me and say, well, what's the second house? And I say, I told you that last week. Why are you not remembering this? And so I find that this approach is wise, which is sort of what I've been trying to do all these years, is to try to bring it into the mainstream, make it part of the vernacular so that people understand and can use the language effectively. And I think that we're going to find generations to come are more inclined towards that. So hopefully that's a step in the right direction. My guest today has been Virginia Bell, the wonderful Virginia Bell. Virginia Bell, astrologer, is her, or is it Virginia Bell Astrologer or Astrology?
Oh, Virginia Bell Astrology.
Virginia Bell Astrology, one long word, is her website. And her book is Midlife is Not a Crisis, Using Astrology to Thrive in the Second Half of Life. I encourage you to look into it. You'll be pleased if you're in that realm. And if you're not there yet, if you're a younger listener and a younger reader, it would be good to sort of figure out what's ahead for you so you could plan your battle plan accordingly.
I like that.
And it's not always a battle. Don't forget, it's not always a battle. It's sometimes it's a real pleasure. So, Virginia, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been great having a chat with you. Again, Virginia Bell Astrology is her website.com. One long word, virginiabellastrology.com. Her book is Midlife is Not a Crisis, Using Astrology to Thrive in the Second Half of Life. You can find it at all your local and regular book outlets, and I encourage you to do that. It's been great to talk to you, Virginia. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Chris.
It's been great. Take care.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.